All right, welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed the pizza. If you turn to page 35 in your manuals, top of the page it says fuel economy tricks. Now, we've tried running class where we've done as much as we possibly could to the vehicles. And guess what? It got us some pretty impressive results. We got well over double the mileage on quite a few vehicles, loading them up with both the HAFC and other tricks, along with some quality tuning. And then we've tried quite a few where we only did the HAFC kit. And quite frankly, these tricks work. The results speak for themselves. Now, I know someone's going to want to raise their hand, and I'm going to point to them. They're going to say, exactly how much is this particular trick worth? Don't, okay? I played around with this stuff. As far as putting them on vehicles, it's usually batch fire. Well, we'll do 2, 3, or 5 tricks all at once. So exactly how much is each and every one worth? Very few of these can I put a number on. All I can say is that cumulatively or independently, they all have value. These tricks are not applicable to all vehicles. So, like one of the things we're going to discuss is extracting the ozone from the distributor cap. Obviously doesn't work on DIS and COP cars. So letter A, hotter fuel, we pretty much touched on that when we discussed the vaporizer, because the diagram in the manual shows strapping the fuel vaporizer, the fuel heater, to the upper radiator hose. Doing so, we don't get any heat until the thermostat opens. And at that, the vaporizer is only touching, through a small contact patch. Putting it between heater hoses will work better. Heater hoses will start getting you thermal energy quicker, and you got double the contact patch doing it between the two of them. Wrapping a heater hose around would be even better. So again, we don't want to go into exhaust temperatures because then we're going to start burning out components. But the more coolant energy we can impart into the fuel, the better. There's 2 experiments that I'm familiar with that were done. One of them, a group decided to see how hot they had to make the fuel to be able to double the mileage. All right, one of the experiments, they decided to see how much thermal energy they had to add to the fuel so that they could lean it out and get double the mileage. And they found it was around 430 degrees Fahrenheit. 430 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, needless to say, with that much heat in the fuel, they blew out the fuel tank, so they had to replace it with a fuel cell. They started popping the rubber fuel lines, so they had to replace them with like 2,500 PSI hydraulic hose. And they started burning out fuel pumps, so they had to, one by one, they started busting things because the factory components just cannot handle that much heat. It burns stuff up, it blows stuff out. But about 425, 430 degrees, double the mileage. They were able to lean it out, keep full drivability, double the mileage. The other experiment, a group decided to see how hot they had to make the engine to be able to lean it out and double the mileage. If you remember yesterday, I talked about the choke. When you first started, it's like a 3-to-1 air-fuel ratio, and you keep leaning it out as you get more and more heat build up in the engine. Well, we stop at, no more than like 205 degrees Fahrenheit. They kept going. They got up to 230, 250. And they started blowing radiator hoses out, so they had to replace them. And then the end caps softened and blew out the radiator, so they had to replace that. And they had to replace the engine and then use a synthetic oil because the oil broke down after a while. But they found it was about 375 degrees, where all they did was increase the engine temperature and lean out the fuel as the engine could handle it. 370, maybe it was 325, whatever it was, they were able to do it. So we know that we can increase the thermal energy in the fuel, just not enough to double the mileage all by itself. We know that we can increase the temperature of the engine, but not enough to double the mileage by itself. But if we can increase the temperature of the engine by 10 degrees, let's say that the car came with the factory 195 thermostat, and let's say a 16 PSI radiator cap. If we do a 205 thermostat, which there are 205 thermostats made for a lot of applications. So we swap out the 195, put a 205 in, and then we put an 18 PSI radiator cap on there to help compensate. There's going to be a third thing we'd have to do, and that is make sure that we've got propylene glycol engine coolant. The green stuff is ethylene glycol. And you small block Chevy guys, you know that they put additional steam ports in the 400s because even with the antifreeze in, it was still boiling off. Well, the propylene glycol will maintain a liquid at higher temperatures. You're not going to get detonation as long as you have liquid in your cooling passages in your cylinder head. If you start boiling off the coolant, you get steam pockets, and the thermal density of steam sucks. You're going to get detonation. Chances are you're going to start breaking parts just because the engine's too hot. So a complete package would be 205 thermostat, complete coolant flush, to get all the crud out, first of all, so you increase the efficiency, and then second of all, to get all the ethylene glycol out. Refill it with propylene glycol solution with a little bit higher rating radiator cap. And as far as heating the fuel goes, again, you know, between heater hoses, maybe wrap a heater hose the whole way around it and then pack it full of good insulation to keep more of that thermal energy in. We fully intend to continually upgrading the HAFC kit. And the vaporizer is one of those things that I'm looking at improving upon so that we can add even more thermal energy into the fuel. Yes, sir?
What about using a heat exchanger? You know what one of those is?
Yeah, exactly. I have one on my bench that I'm going to be putting on my other car. I have this one on the Spirit RT that we have the HAFC kit on, and I'm going to be doing some experiments on this red one when I get the turbo engine in. And it's about this long. It's about this big around, and I think it's touted as a transmission cooler. So you have engine coolant that goes through the outer housing, and then your transmission fluid coils around on the inside. So it's a liquid-to-liquid heat exchanger. Well, I'm going to run the engine coolant through, but I'm going to run fuel through the other side and use that as a fuel heater. That cost about $55 new. I paid, I think, $15 for it. Brand spanking new, never installed on anything, but it was, you know, pre-purchased. Got it off eBay or something, I don't know, one of the forums. So there's things that you can do to increase the temperature closer to that of the engine coolant in the fuel. Hot air intake, top of page 36. This one is one of those tricks that works great on some vehicles and not so well on others. My brother bought a '98 Ford Mustang with the V6 in it. He put a cold air intake on, claims he went from 17 to 23 miles per gallon or some crap like that. However, I've done hot air intakes and have picked up fuel economy. Our 91 Spirit RT, turbocharged. You're thinking, why would you want to heat the air on a turbocharged engine? There's a cool trick. The trick is the hose between the intercooler and the throttle body. I cut and I put a T in there. I just took exhaust pipe and I made my own little T. And then coming off the one leg of that T, I went to a sump pump check valve. So if you have a basement that tends to get water in there, you have a little sump pump, goes to a low area and pumps the water up and out. Well, when that pump turns off, gravity will pull that water back down again. And, you know, Lowe's, Home Depot, regular hardware stores will sell a little check valve to keep that water from pumping back into the basement. So I installed that. And then I just took a small, like, valve cover breather filter and put it on the end of that. That is mounted right behind the radiator. So under normal throttle, path of least resistance is right through that filter, through the check valve, and up into the throttle body, as opposed to the factory air cleaner down through the turbo, through a couple of bends, through the intercooler, another bend or two, and then into the throttle body. So I'm able to get hot air under normal throttle conditions. Now when I pounce on it, I definitely don't want hot air. But that's okay. As soon as that turbo kicks in, the boost kicks in, slaps that check valve closed. Now I'm drawing air through the normal system. On carbureted vehicles and TBI vehicles, you usually had like a little diaphragm on the top of the air cleaner snorkel. And then up underneath, you had a little thermal valve switch. So you'd run manifold vacuum to the switch, then from the switch to the diaphragm. Had a little door in there that would either draw the hot air or draw the cold air. So my dad's Ram Charger's TBI, and I just ran vacuum directly to the door so that it pulls it up constantly while you're driving. Well, when you get on the throttle, the vacuum goes away, that door drops down and it draws the cold air. You back off the throttle, you get vacuum back and it sucks it back up to draw the hot air. You can play around with just, redirecting, intake ducting and so forth, but that's just giving you ideas. Is there a right way, or are you going to ask me, how do I do it on this? I'm just giving you ideas. Any questions? Lighter weight oils. I'm going to share some secrets with you guys. Everyone thinks, 2050 racing oil protects the engine great. You've at least heard that, even if you don't believe it. The fact of the matter is that there are two types of forces that a lubricant will protect against. One is compressive force. The other is shear force. All right? Now, a differential where you have the gears slamming together, that is a compressive force. There's somewhat of a shear force as they slide in and slide out, but it's more of a compressive force. An engine where you have a journal that has high pressure oil and a crankshaft spinning inside that journal, the crankshaft does not touch the bearing. At least it's not supposed to. And so what you have there is the crankshaft trying to shear against the journal. Now, the compressive force, you need the heavier weight oil. You may be able to get away with a lighter oil than what the factory put in there, but you still need a fairly heavyweight oil. That's what protects against compressive forces. But the shear forces, the lighter weight oils are your best buddy. Think about this. When you go out and you do a cold start and you got 2050 racing oil in this type of weather, how many seconds go by before the oil light goes out? Because that oil is so thick, it just doesn't want to get sucked up through there into the oil pump, distributed out into, and you hear that clack, 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 and that quiets down. The lifters, That lightweight oil, you hit the key and oil lights out, you got full circulation. You've actually protected your engine better on cold startup with a lighter weight oil. That lighter weight oil is going to find its way up through all those passages easier than that heavier weight oil. Grab a funnel, take honey or molasses and pour into that funnel. How long before it starts dripping out? Now let's take something like soda and pour it in. It's coming out as quick as it's going in. Do you see the correlation there? So if you have a good tight engine, you can get away with running a 5W20 oil. You can run a 0W20 oil in a synthetic. I don't know of any Dino-based 0W20s, but I know AMSOIL, Mobil One, Royal Purple, all make a 0W20 engine oil. And we run 0W20 AMSOIL in the Spirit RT. Turbo. 0W20 in that 91 Spirit RT. So you run lighter oil. Now the oil pump doesn't have to work as hard to pump that oil throughout the engine. So A, you've actually got better protection, and B, you're going to lose less of the power the engine makes to parasitic losses, internal friction. So you just improve the performance and the economy of that engine by going with the lighter oil, and it lasts longer. How can you lose? Now if you have a differential that has like 90 W120 gear oil in it, you could probably go with the 75 W90 and still get sufficient protection, but yet reduce the parasitic losses in the differential. Any questions or back talk and disagreement there? Because a lot of people come in convinced that the heavier the oil, the better it protects the engine. Because that used to be the, Huh?
That's assuming you have a tight engine, but if you got an old, you know, you got something over 100,000.
If you had, mileage has nothing to do with it. Bearing clearances does.
Right.
So if you've got engine knock because of bearing clearances, now that is a compressive force.
Okay, yes.
Now you just change the rules.
Right.
Now compressive, you need a 2050 or something to cushion that compression. Another issue is just the way that oil will find its way through all the little lifter bore passages and stuff easier. It'll also find its way through leaky gaskets and seals easier. So if you have an engine that's already dumping a quart every 100 miles, going with the lighter weight oil may not be the right answer. You had a question?
Yeah, there's manufacturers' specs call for certain weights, oils and stuff, you know, like engines, differentials, transmissions, whatever. How does what you just said sit with that?
If you take a look, pick a 1970-something automobile, and you look in the owner's manual, it will typically recommend like a 10 or 15 W40. Or they'll do like the summer you use a 1540, in the winter you use a 1030. All right? Look at the quality of the oil that was offered when that vehicle was new back in the 70s. Now, every time they change the oil grading, the oil has gotten better up until this last time. This last time when they went to, what is it, SI rating, the quality of the oil actually backtracked. It got worse. So the oils that they have on the market now, they've removed the zinc oxide from. The zinc oxide is what's going to protect that camshaft on the old style, camshaft. Now, the EPA justified that because there hasn't been an engine sold in the United States in probably 15 years that still have that friction contact flat tablet style cam. They're all rollers. But if you do an engine rebuild and you're using, a normal camshaft and you use off-the-shelf oil, you're going to wipe that cam. It's going to happen, guaranteed. So you've either got to, get like a racing oil that still has the zinc oxide in it, that it's for off-road use only and doesn't have to qualify for that new SI rating, or go with a diesel oil because the diesels still have the zinc oxide in them. Havoline, there's a couple, but
what about synthetic?
Well, yeah, if the engine's broken in, if it's a fresh engine, you put synthetic in there, you'll never seat the rings. So you got to have a pretty lousy quality oil in there as far as letting the rings seal, but the zinc oxide keeps that lousy oil from chewing up the cam. But once you've got a broken in engine, synthetic's great.
So I'm building a 61 Lincoln 430 right now.
Break it in on like a diesel oil.
So put some fidelity in it.
And as far as breaking the engine in,
and then once we get through the break, 500,000 miles or whatever.
500,000 miles, that's broken by then.
Then switch it over to AMSOIL. That'll be okay.
Yeah.
AMSOIL would not need the zinc.
AMSOIL has the zinc oxide in it. AMSOIL does not qualify for the new SI rating.
Okay.
Because they refuse to remove the good stuff. They don't care what EPA says. They just say, we'll just go without the certification.
Very good.
As far as breaking engines in, a new engine, it used to be thought that you just took it easy, just light feathered and so forth. Romp and stomp that bad boy.
Why not do it to seat the rings in?
Yep, because what happens is your ring land is this thick and your ring is just a little bit thinner. So on the intake stroke, the ring kind of shifts to the bottom of that land, and then on the compression stroke, it shifts, goes to the top initially, but the pressure will push it down to the bottom. So you got pressure going around there, and the piston ring actually rides on the bottom of that ring lamp. The pressure comes in behind the ring, gets in behind there, and then pushes that ring out tight against the cylinder. If you don't build up sufficient pressure during break-in, then your rings and your cylinder wall will glaze over and it won't make full contact. So you need to literally push that ring out tight against that cylinder wall while you're breaking it in to ensure a good seal. Make sure everything's nice and round. So that old-fashioned take it easy for the first 2,000 miles crap, get on that thing, romp on that thing, and seat those rings good. And then change the oil right away because you're going to load it up with, well, ring and cylinder wall. But you get a lot better compression that way. Okay, any other questions? Additives in the oil. Letter D, page 37. there's two additives, and they're both listed. There's two additives that I can put my name on. Does that mean those are the only two additives in the whole world worth using? No. I get that question, well, I use this. Well, if you like it, keep using it. If you want to try something different, here's two that I've used that I'm willing to put my name on. I don't sell either one of them, just endorsing them because I feel confident in putting my name on them. They're good products. One is energy release. Now, there is energy release in the back room here. So if one of the things you want to do as far as fuel economy tricks is put an additive in, energy release will be provided for the vehicle you're working on, along with instructions as far as how much to use. The other product that I endorse is Muscle Products, MT10. If you take a freshly turned crankshaft and you put it under a microscope, it doesn't come out perfectly smooth. You have gouges and ridges and just sharp edges. Microscopic level now, mind you, but nevertheless. Atoms have positive and negative polarities. Magnetism, electricity, all ties together. Well, all the high spots are going to have a positive charge. All of the low spots are going to have a negative charge. Energy release and muscle products act as an electrolyte. Electrolyte, like fuel cell electrolyte. Electrolytes allow charges to pass through. Rust is formed by ionization, the passing of electrons. It's an electrical process. Rust is an electrical process. We're not going to make the crankshaft rusty, but the same process that turns steel into rust is the same electrical process that energy release and muscle products use to turn this into that. These high sides fill in the low sides. The net result is a very, very smooth surface. You reduce friction by smoothing the surface. And I'm not aware of any other product that works like that. I am aware that the Muscle Products has private labels, so you can find the same exact chemical in different labels. But those two products, they actually change the surface of the metal. Yes, sir?
Do you get any knowledge about Lucas Oil Products?
I've used it, and I'm not impressed with it. I know it's very expensive. It is good if you have a compressive issue, like loose rod bearings and stuff. Boy, it quiets a noisy engine down like nothing. And that's the only thing that I've ever used Lucas on, and I've tried it on a couple of vehicles, and it worked good on quieting down a noisy engine, but I didn't get any improvement in fuel economy using it on the others.
Have you ever heard of ProTech?
See, I told you, man, as soon as I mention everything, oh, I use this, what about that? What do you think it is? If you like it, use it. I'm just telling you, here's some that I tried.
It's a lot of the same things. Creates a smoother
Prolong is repackaged Muscle Products. That's the only one that I know of, and that one slipped out. I'm not supposed to know that, neither are you. Muscle Products wouldn't like me for saying that. But Prolong is Muscle Products MT10 repackaged. The Muscle Products can be used in engines, manual transmissions, automatic transmissions, transfer cases, differentials, even if it has a friction type limited slip, power steering, air conditioning compressors. I use the Muscle Products in my shop compressor. Very universal. It is not a friction modifier. Most of the additives out there are friction modifiers. You cannot use them in an automatic transmission. You cannot use them in a limited slip differential. They screw things up. All right, spark plugs. Typical spark plug will have a center electrode and then an outer electrode. Conventional, nothing fancy. What we're going to do is we're going to bend the outer electrode out of the way. We're going to take a drill bit about the same size, maybe a little bit bigger than our center electrode, and we are going to put a satellite dish in that center electrode. We're going to cup it. So if you have a 135-degree tip on your drill bit, you'll have a 135-degree cup in your center electrode. And then, feeling it from the top, we're going to go to the outer electrode, and right about dead center, we're going to put a 1/16 inch hole with a cobalt bit. I should say cobalt or better. Diamond tip bits would also work. But the titanium nitrate bits, the high-speed steel, won't get through this tough tungsten alloy outer electrode. The TIN bits, you get through one, maybe two, and then they're dull. You snap them. The cobalt, I can do probably 20 or 30 spark plugs before it's no longer usable. Now, what does all of this do, you ask? Very good question. Well, I've got spark plugs everywhere, but I found one that'll work. All right, the center electrode, I'm going to pass this around. Skip, you because you're sleeping? The center electrode's going to act like a satellite dish. And when you start that spark, you start out with a little tiny kernel that, increases to the size of a pea, and it starts expanding outward. Well, that center electrode will broadcast that, concentrate that to the hole in our outer electrode. So we're going to take that initial charge and we're going to focus it right at that 16th inch hole. And what we wind up with is about a 1/4 inch long focused pencil torch coming out the tip right here. Like that. 1/4 inch is 0.25 inches. What do we gap our spark plugs at? 0.40? I'm sorry, 0.040. 0.040. So 0.040 inch gap, you know how that lights the fire in your engine. You drive it all the time. You got a feel for it. Now imagine if you could throw a 1/4 inch, 4, 5, 5. Wow, six times the spark energy, 6 times the flame propagation on that initial, 6 times shooting out right into the heart of everything in the combustion chamber. 6 times. This is one I can put a number on. Yes, sir?
Can you see that if you lay it on, lay it on the valve cover and have the hook? Can you see it?
No, because you're not exploding any fuel. All you see is the arc. You need to actually have fuel, you need to build up a kernel, and you need to have that expansion, and that's what forces up through the center hole. Yes, sir?
That won't have any bad effect on the aluminum piston, will it?
That will not have any bad effect on the aluminum piston. No, it will not. Because at this point, that pencil tip torch, no, it won't. No, not at all. Okay, this is one that I actually can put a number on. I was doing some 3-fuel engineering back in 2000. Gasoline, propane, natural gas. The project was a 20 kW backup generator. So the actual load, or the generator, was a 20 kW unit. We built a 20 kW load bank so that we could put a load on this thing. And then the engine was 2.2 Chrysler. Early 80s carbureted version. And so the engine itself was stock. We didn't do any internal modifications. we had a dual fuel carburetor on it that would have the bowl on the one side with the twin solenoids, so we could shut off the liquid and open up the gaseous fuel, or switch solenoids and run it off liquid gasoline. Now, we all know that gasoline has a lot more BTU energy in it than propane, which has more than natural gas. So I did a load test on this thing. It runs at 1,800 RPMs, which is not very fast. And I got 20 kW off of gasoline. I got 19 kW off of propane, and I got about 16 kW off the natural gas. All I did was I drilled the spark plugs, and then I indexed them, which I'll get to in just a minute. And I retested. I did not change timing. All I did was drill the plugs and index them. I still got 20 kW off of the gasoline, because after all, that's the limit of my generator, that's the limit of my load bank. Who knows how much it could have done. I got an easy 20 out of the propane. And I got 19¼ out of the natural gas. So running this Chrysler 2.2 engine at 1,800 RPMs, I got a 22% increase in power output on natural gas. I did not do economy testing, but there's like a torque test. What is indexing? Well, that plug that's being passed around, now's a good time to mention it, has a line drawn on the back side that corresponds with the outer electrode. So what I do is I just, on the spark plug itself, I'll draw a line down here so I know where the back side is. Just on the side of the plug, just draw a line that lines up here. And then when I install it, we got the combustion chamber here. We got intake and exhaust valve. And then we got the spark plug hole here. I want the outer electrode going back against the cylinder head. Viewed from the side, all right, I want the spark plug coming in here to where the outer electrode goes up towards the cylinder head. Now, what does that do? It gets it out of the way of the activity inside the engine. Because remember, we talked about big block Chryslers versus small block Chevy squish pads. So if you got activity going on inside of there, just tuck that outer electrode out of the way. Get it out of the way so that the activity can happen. And as things are swirling around in there, you're not going to block the air-fuel charge as it's coming along, and spread it out and deflect it and cause a misfire. And you're not going to actually deflect, once you get the spark happening, you're not going to deflect the flame front somewhere where it's not optimal. Just get it up and out of the way. Once it does go off, even though we're going to try to shoot as much of the charge up through here as we can, there's also going to be deflection outward, like this. Well, if this part of it is back up against the cylinder head here, then this part is going out into the combustion chamber where our air-fuel charge is that we're trying to ignite, right? Now, how do you get it to line up like that? If I'm doing a V8 engine, I buy 8 spark plugs, I put the little line on them, I'll go to cylinder number 1, spin a plug in. It doesn't line up where I want it. I'll go to cylinder 2, 3, 4, keep going until it finally lines up. Then I'll grab another plug, go back to cylinder 1, 2, 3, it lines up. Grab another one, cylinder 1, keep going. And I can usually get 5 out of 8 of the spark plugs to line up without any changes. And then for the other 3, you get into indexing washers. This packet is for the style plug that's being passed around. This packet is for the GM tapered style plug. They're different thicknesses. Moroso puts the different thicknesses different colors. So you look on the back side, it tells you which color is going to change by how many degrees. So on the tapered plug, you just slide it on, try it. With that, you usually remove the compressive washer that comes on the spark plug and replace it with that. But at that point, you're getting even closer. And if you're going to get real meticulous race engine, you can actually sand them down, make the washers a little thinner, and that'll allow you to turn it just a little bit further, a little bit further. I only ever did that on one engine. Usually close enough is close enough. Yes, sir?
I got two questions. First, about 4 valves in spark plug stay in the middle.
Okay.
And second, in same cars got 2 spark plugs in each. So.
Okay. Before I answer your question, are there any questions on indexing and the drilling?
Can you turn your board just a little bit? Thank you.
No? Okay. He asked, what about pent roof 16 valves? And what about twin plug heads? The twin plug heads with the 2 valves per cylinder, again, do the same thing. Tuck the outer electrode up into the head, like a 2.3 Ford or a 2.4 Nissan. Just tuck the outer electrode up into the head. On the pent roof, don't even worry about this. Pent roof, you would do a different style spark plug. And there's 2 that work really well. One is where you have the multiple outer electrodes side gapped. So, you know, from the top, looks something like that. And then another one that is an aircraft style plug where you have your center electrode and the outer electrode is just part of the ground, part of the spark plug. You see? So you're actually jumping spark.
Is that called a halo plug?
Huh?
Halo plug.
Yeah, a halo plug is similar. They're a good plug. I've seen the old design, which is obsolete, no longer in production. I've seen their more modern replacement. And they're both good plugs. Brisk, www.brisk-usa.com sells the LSG plug, as they call it, which is the aircraft style plug. They also have nicknamed it the Lamborghini plug because that plug's the only thing that you'll ever find in a new Lamborghini now. That's standard equipment on the new Lamborghinis. But that is an awesome, awesome plug for a pent roof. Any other questions? Okay, if you have a DIS ignition, one coil feeds 2 cylinders. And in order to do so, you have the voltage traveling from center electrode to outer electrode on the one, from outer electrode to center electrode on the other, correct? All right, if you have a single platinum plug where the center electrode is platinum, it will fire very easily from center to outer, where the outer is just, you know, the tungsten steel alloy. But on the other one, it will not fire very easily at all in reverse. So if you're looking at an oscilloscope and you're looking at a platinum, single tip platinum plug on a DIS 6-cylinder, you got that's what it looks like. You got nice short spikes where it's flowing from center to outer. Where it's flowing from outer to center, the resistance is just horrendous. It'll just sit there and just not idle right, and the power goes away. So you don't want to use a single platinum plug on a DIS system. So then they started doing where they put the platinum here and here. And that alleviated that for the most part, made it more tolerable. As far as platinum plugs go, I don't like them. Believe it or not, neither do the OEMs that are putting them in. So why do the OEMs put them in? Because the EPA has mandated that that engine will go 100,000 miles without touching it and still pass a smog test. 100,000 miles. Come on, we're not that old, guys. I remember back when it was every 8 or 10,000 miles, you were in filing the points and then putting the dwell meter on it, or a match, stick or something. Now I have to go 100,000 miles without so much as replacing a spark plug. That's why they go with the platinum, because the platinum will go 100,000 miles without deteriorating the performance. Is the platinum plug going to give you the best performance, the best fuel economy? Oh my God, no. Not at all. So if you've got a late model vehicle with 18,000 miles on it and platinum plugs in there and the customer wants some more, if the customer's willing to bring it back every 25,000 miles for new plugs, go with the standard plug. Get rid of those stupid, worthless, trashed platinums. Any questions on that? How about iridiums? I guess, I don't know. I've never used them. All right, what do we got here next? Page 38. Distributor cap ozone mod. So, we take a standard distributor cap. Now this cap has a vent where we can equalize the pressure inside the cap with the atmosphere. My uncle had a 90 Dodge pickup, and he decided he was going to give it a full tune-up, man. He went out and he bought cap rotor, plugs, wires, fuel filter, PCV, air filter, everything. And the old cap he took off had that little vent on it. The new cap he put on did not have that vent on it. And I was there when he was doing the tune-up, and I said, you know, Unc, I'd drill a hole in that cap if I were you. Oh, no, they would not give me something that wasn't right. I'd trust them. Okay, he put it on. 2 weeks later, oh, I don't know, I think my TPS is bad or something. It's just not running right. Well, maybe it's the fuel pump because that TPS didn't fix it. No, it ain't the fuel pump. Maybe it's the map sensor. One by one, he's going through and replacing everything on the engine, right down to the stupid computer, and it still ran like garbage. He couldn't get it much further than out the driveway. And he asked me to come over, and we spent like 2.5 hours. I'm pulling my hair out and going, geez. Finally, I pulled the cap off, and I looked inside there, and it was just all carbon tracked up. Because what was happening is his PCV valve was putting a vacuum on the engine enough that it ran up the distributor shaft, put a slight vacuum inside the cap. You don't want a vacuum inside the distributor cap. So why'd you tell you all that? So I could tell you this. We're going to take the distributor cap and we're going to drill a hole opposite the vent. Then we're going to take a piece of this plastic emissions tubing that we all have at least 30 feet of back in some corner of the shop. And we're going to epoxy it down into the cap. It should stick through enough that you have maximum contact surface area between the tubing and the cap, but not so far that the rotor catches it. And then we're going to take and we're going to run this to our throttle body or the intake platinum, somewhere where we can take the ozone that's being manufactured inside the distributor, evacuate it out of the distributor. The distributor cap lasts longer because the ozone is a powerful oxidizer. We're going to put it in the engine where now it can actually help to aid that OH process, combustion. See, ozone is a radical in and of itself. Oxygen is O2. O2 is a happy-go-lucky, easy-going kind of chemical. It doesn't want to fight with anybody, man. It's just the guy, you know, if you go into a bar, he's the guy sitting down at the end, just minding his own business, not bothering nobody. Ozone is O3. And that's just like taking her kid sister out on a date, man. You want to get rid of her. 2 people, happy. Kid sister, you want to get rid of it. So the ozone is unstable. It acts like the bully that comes staggering in, pushing people and challenging everybody to a fight. That's ozone. It wants to rip something's head off. So when you draw ozone into the combustion chamber, you get a more violent burning of the fuel. Textbook definition, not mine, you actually extract more BTUs of energy from that fuel than it supposedly has. The more ozone you can get into the engine to replace the standard stable oxygen gas, the more energy you get from that fuel. The better the fuel economy, the better the performance. True story. Huh?
What about ozone bulbs? They put them in air conditioning vents to kill bugs. They have ozone bulbs. If you put that in there, would it?
www.amazing1.com will sell you an ozone driver and an ozone coil. And they give bulk discounts. You order 5 or more, price goes down about $5 a piece. The 30 milligram per hour units, they're 12 volt DC powered. So if you have a DIS engine, COP engine, no distributor, you could still pump ozone into the engine. Now here's a true story for you. My buddy went to a car show. He's a car buff like me. There's a reason we're buddies. And he saw this early 60s Corvette. And he's just looking around at it, and he noticed a bunch of wires going into the air cleaner from the back. And the owner was standing there waxing and buffing. He said, "Excuse me, sir, what are all those wires going into the air cleaner?" The owner of the car just kind of smiled. He said, "It's just something stupid." And my buddy said, "Wouldn't happen to be ozone, would it?" The guy's jaw dropped. He goes, "You know about ozone?" He goes, "Well, I know some. I've done some playing." "Well, yeah, it is." "Well, can I see?" Took the lid off that air cleaner, and he had coils the whole freaking way around the inside of that air cleaner housing. I don't know how many milligrams an hour he was making, but a lot. So my buddy said, "Well, what does it do for you?" He goes, "Man, I'm turning high tens with this old 327 vet." Jeez. I attribute a lot of it to that ozone. Damn. Well, let me ask you this. I know this is probably not your thing, but have you ever actually checked the fuel economy on this car? And he just started laughing. He goes, yeah. I drive it to the shows and stuff, and I get over 60 miles per gallon.
60?
Over 60 miles per gallon with an early 60s 327 vet that'll turn 10s in the quarter. He attributes it to copious amounts of ozone. And then, of course, he has the carburetor tuned for it. Remember we talked about tuning? He has the ignition timing tuned for it. He tuned the engine for all of this ozone he pumped into the engine. So that little distributor cap mod, I did it on my Charger, and it went from about 33 to 38. I did it on a guy I used to work with, had a Ford Ranger with the 2.9 V6 four-wheel drive. He went from 17 to 22. Same guy decided he wanted it on his wife's Plymouth Acclaim, 3-liter Mitsubishi V6 in there. It went from the same thing to the same thing. It didn't do a daggone thing for the Acclaim. There was nothing done to tune for it, and it just kept dumping the same amount of fuel, didn't get any better fuel economy. So there are exceptions to every rule, but ozone has an overwhelming track record of being a very, very potent performance and fuel economy. What's nitrous oxide? It's an oxidizer, isn't it? What was ozone? What did I say that was? An oxidizer? Any questions on that? All right, next one, oxygen sensor wrap. Oxygen sensors require a certain amount of heat to be functional. There's a lot of 80s era vehicles and some 90s era vehicles running around that are just single wire. They have no heater. And if you got a scan gauge and you're watching them, you get to a stoplight, automatic transmission, foot's on the brake, idling at 650, 700 RPMs. There's not enough thermal energy in the exhaust to keep that oxygen sensor online. It pops into open loop. You go and you take off, and it takes a second or two or three, and then it pops back into closed loop. So if you wrap the oxygen sensor, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to keep the heat in better. The chances of it popping into open loop have been reduced by that wrap. The second thing it does is the oxygen sensor is a comparator. It compares the amount of oxygen in the sampling area in the exhaust system to the amount of oxygen immediately outside the housing. So if you put a wrap around that oxygen sensor, you're going to heat the air immediately around that sampling area. There's fewer oxygen molecules per given space. And it sends a leaner mixture back to the computer. So even if you have a vehicle you cannot put an optimizer on, you wrap the oxygen sensor and that's going to lean it out just a little bit. Yeah, that's what I mean. It'll lean it out. All right, tire pressures. Boy, this one's underrated, pun intended. I challenge you to do a little experiment. Take your vehicle that you're normally running like 32 or 35 pounds pressure in, and go on a road where you can get up to a speed like 55 miles an hour, and get it to where you're holding 55, holding 55. Here comes a sign. Pop it into neutral. And then go to like the next sign, look down and see what your speed is. That is a determining fact that tells you what your rolling resistance is. Assume that there's no wind, you know. Then go back to the shop and air them up to like 45 PSI. Add 10 pounds of pressure to them. Go out and do the exact same test again and see what your speed is while you go past the second sign. You'll be amazed. 45 to 50 PSI seems to be that cutoff area where you add any more pressure than that, it just gives you a really lousy, harsh ride, but it doesn't improve the fuel economy much. Now, this is applicable to passenger cars. I mean, light-duty trucks, yeah, I mean, you know, their pressures are running at 80 PSI recommended. But just a normal car where I recommend, you know, like 32, 35 PSI, jack it up. Now, you got people driving these Mercury Grand Marquis, and they come in and they want the better fuel economy. And one of the things that you know is a guaranteed 2 or 3 miles per gallon, at least, is up in the tire pressure. So you do it. And you have a feeling, a suspicion that this guy, he ain't going to like that ride. That, you know, I was going that's a little bit rough. I mean, what did you do? We just rode so smooth before. So, when the customer comes to pick up the vehicle, after you've done all the work to it and you're ready to put your name on it and send it out, you sit down and say, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, I noticed that your tire pressures were on the low end of the acceptable range. And what that does is that makes it soft. They roll. You have less control going around corners. The tires themselves will heat up. That's where blowouts come from. You remember the old Ford Explorer rollover controversy with Firestone tires? That was because Firestone had not enough air in the tires. So I took the liberty of taking and adding more air to your tires. I think you'll find that it's a nice, controlled, firm ride as compared to the mushy ride you had before. It's definitely safer, and they'll give you a little better fuel economy. I bet you any money they will not complain about the ride if you put it in a perspective like that for them. If you just do it and send it out and they come back and say, man, it just doesn't ride this thing. Oh, I upped your tire pressures. Oh, put them back, put them back. But remember, we're guaranteeing 50% increase with the HAFC. How much does this trick cost you? It's well worth it to me. In fact, if you think about all the tricks that I've talked about, you know, putting a hole in the distributor cap and running some line, that's a freebie. The hot air intake, I mean, if it's easy to do, it's a freebie. I mean, turbo cars, yeah, okay, it costs some money. But just, you know, running manifold vacuum up to the air cleaner store, that's a freebie. What else did we cover here? The O2 sensor wrap, oh, geez, that's a freebie. How long does that take? Additives in the oil, well, all right, but it's still quick and easy. Lighter weight oil, sell them an oil change. Instead of putting the heavy stuff in, put the light stuff in. Net difference, that's a freebie. You starting to see a pattern here? Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things we can do that will add significant cost to what you're doing or take a long time to do. And there's a lot of really good tricks out there, too. I just tried to include the ones that were just quick, simple, easy, or just that important. So the next one is orgone fuel filter. What is orgone? Anybody? Life force energy. Orientals called it chi or ki. along the same lines. In fact, if you look in there, I listed a couple of websites for you to, or a couple of subjects to investigate. Joe cell, Wilhelm Reich. Those are two areas that ought to get you pretty excited about orgone. But orgone, being a life force energy, is about as big as the ether itself. And you cannot trap it. Trying to trap orgone with any material, any substance known to man, is like trying to trap a speeding bullet as it tries to go through our interplanetary system. As long as it misses the Earth, and as long as it misses the Moon, and as long as it misses Mars and doesn't get sucked into the Sun, how are you going to trap a bullet going through our solar system? You can't. Orgone energy will permeate anything. So what we got to do is we got to make a party house for the orgone. Someplace it just wants to go and hang out. And that's done with the alternating layers of organic, inorganic, organic, inorganic, steel wool, lamb's wool, wax paper, and steel. Organic, inorganic. And for some reason, that life force energy is attracted to that combination. I think somewhere in the book of Exodus, there's this big box mentioned. They called it the Ark of the Covenant. It was alternating layers of gold and shittim wood, gold and shittim wood, inorganic and organic. That attracted so much energy to it that they powered the lights in the temple off of that thing. Plus, if anybody touched it, they were holding a funeral that afternoon for them. So, the Ark of the Covenant was an orgone accumulator, a big capacitor. When you do this, you do not want the alternating metal layers touching. So you take a fuel filter, you know, this big, and you put a layer of like wax paper. You want the wax paper to hang out over the edges. And then when you do your aluminum foil layer, kind of keep it in a little bit because you don't want these two layers to touch. And then your wax paper hanging out over the edge there. Then the next one, again, you know, kind of keep it in tight so that the two layers don't touch. And then go ahead and put your wax paper out over top. When you're done, spray it with polyurethane or something to keep the moisture out, because the aluminum will start turning into that white powder aluminum oxide if you get moisture in there. So seal it as best you can. I have nothing scientific that I can add to this. I have nothing of proof of worthwhile other than if it intrigues you, check out some of the subjects, the Joe cell, Wilhelm Reich, orgone, chi, whatever. Yes, sir?
Will this work with one of the plastic filters?
Mm-hmm.
It'll work with that?
You just got to start out with a metal layer, then go wax paper, metal, wax paper. I'm going to touch briefly on Wilhelm Reich. He was a lot of things, did a lot of studies. Some of them I don't really... Anyways, he did cancer research. And he would build what looked like an outhouse. And it was alternating layers of steel wool and sheep's wool. Steel wool, sheep's wool. And people would go into this outhouse 20 minutes a day or so, and their cancer would go away. Leukemia would go away. He was healing people with this life force energy. But like any source of energy, whether it's electricity or magnetism, it has polarity. You have the life force energy on the one side, and you have what's called DOR, deadly orgone, on the other side. Life force energy cures cancer. DOR kills people. So here's some don'ts as far as playing with orgone. Don't get this next to a high voltage supply, like right next to the alternator. Don't play around with it in your house next to the television set or the microwave oven. If you're going to build yourself a cancer cure, don't use aluminum as one of the, as the metal component. Aluminum foil on an engine, that's fine, but not for human beings. And research it before you play with it, other than just doing a fuel filter wrap. Fuel filter wrap, you're good to go, okay? But there's so much more to it. Just be careful with it. It's a pretty potent force. Ground wires. All right, if you've got a 2006 vehicle you're doing an HAFC retrofit on, I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say the ground wires are probably pretty accurate. But if you've got a 1995 Ford pickup that you're doing an HAFC kit on, I would seriously look at the ground wires. You're going to probably see, the salt buildup around the screw that holds the ground wires up against the inner fender. And you pull them out and you can see it's all cruddied up. And you go up to the block and the same thing. And the fact is that you might even see the insulation fraying away and a couple of strands hanging out where instead of having 50 strands, it's down to 4. Poor grounds. You want to try something? Put your own meter test lead on the negative side of the battery and go around and start testing grounds at different points. You want to be truly amazed? You want to stand up and say, I'd never thought if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. Have an engine running. Sit there at 2,000 RPMs and then ground to the battery and the other lead to the exhaust pipe and watch how many volts you can pull off that exhaust pipe.